So, from your knowledge as a trauma surgeon and working both in the field and in hospital settings, and now as chair of the Stop the Bleed program, are there unnecessary deaths, in your opinion, in the United States from bleeding? Are there people dying out there that shouldn't be dying?
Yes. It's a
Really,
short
in
and easy yes.
In the United States of America?
Yes.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to HUMED, a podcast where we unveil the human side of medicine. I'm incredibly delighted and honored to have, for the fifth time, Dr. David Shapiro, who's my Dan Aykroyd, and I'm Letterman on the show. And his last name, so we don't have any confusion, is Shapiro. Mine is Spiro. There was a fight over a cow. Let's just get to it. Fight over a cow, 1800s. The Spiros and Shapiros were in it for a while, and this is karmic resolution of the Spiro-Shapiro infighting, and now we're friends. It's all good.
I love it.
So welcome to the show, Dr. Shapiro. And David, just for those of you that don't know, is a surgeon. He's a fellowship-trained critical care physician where we met at Oregon Health and Science University. He has a master's degree from Harvard, and currently he is working as a procurement surgeon in New England, and also is a chair of the Stop the Bleed program, which is part of the American College of Surgeons public health advocacy to reduce morbidity and mortality for people who are bleeding out in the community nationwide and internationally. He's an advocate for so many different things, including the gay and lesbian community, and most importantly, he's a friend that I really appreciate, and his advocacy and expressing his view of humanity. And that's what we're trying to unveil in HUMED. And David, honestly, it's an honor and privilege to have you back on the show again.
Well, I'm glad to be here, especially today since it's your birthday. So happy birthday.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Your listenership that is your birthday. And he is, for some reasons, older than I am, but looks like could be my son. So it's very annoying to me. But that's what brings the ha to Shapiro instead of Spiro.
There we go. No, it is interesting. You know, when it's someone's birthday when you're in your 60s, that I can claim now, it's a time to be less celebratory. Of course, there's some celebration, but it's really more about appreciating the fact that I'm here. I'm able to walk around and get up every day, and also just appreciating the fact that I have friends and family who love me and I love them, and that's the meaning of life, in my opinion. And I'm glad to call you one of my good friends, and it's really an honor to have you a part of the show and really support the mission that we are on, which is to unveil the human side of medicine. So I would love to hear what story you have for us today, Dr. David Shapiro.
Thanks, David. So when we talked about doing this, I wanted to have a conversation with myself about the first time I ever was exposed to injury in a way that I could do something about. So I shared with you once that I was witness to a stabbing when I was, young, 15 years old. But I couldn't do much as a bystander then, and that definitely makes me feel it now with what I'm doing with the American College of Surgeons. But it was later on. It was when I was in 2001, right when I was about to finish medical school and go on to residency, that a mentor of mine gifted me an experience where we went to Bryce and Zion and did a mountain biking trip between the two parks over a few days. And I'm not exactly the fittest human being in the world, but I was fitter than back then. And I remember having someone tell me, when you have a story like this that you have to tell, write it down. So I found this story that I wrote down in a journal back when I was on that trip years ago. It took about 7 pages of a journal this big that was flexible, it was in a bag. So Um, this was on a mountain biking trip that I mentioned. It was 20 something years ago, and it was just before starting med school when there really were no cell phones in your hand. They were big bricks, and it wasn't feasible to bring them with you on a trip like this. And it wasn't feasible to bring more than a small, either film or early digital camera with you. And you had to charge it. It would last a few hours. The trip was from Bryce to Zion. It was about 120 miles over 4 days. And I was a reasonably experienced mountain biker back then. And I knew that I wanted to do this type of trip eventually. So it was kind of a fortunate experience. The rock was like this. It was mid-June. The rock was like sun-baked, iron-toned, beautiful. And I had calves from rugby, and I was able to cycle, and I was able to maintain this. But you could smell the dry rock, and you could smell the beautiful kind of drying out smoke in the air from a couple fires in Bryce Canyon. And I'd had a new helmet, and I had a new bag, and I was getting all ready. And the bicycle that we brought was my like soft tail that I was very excited to have, and it just was amazing. And I was excited because the first day was a challenge, but we went about 35 miles in a day, and a lot of it was up, down, up, down. The second day was a lot of this roller coaster of ridge lines and hoodoos and steep hills and a single track mountain bike experience that some of your listeners, I hope, have experienced because it's beautiful. And I remember saying, I'm confident about the course today. My overconfidence about the course today led me astray. So I wound up being a little bit early in my turn in one spot in the Navajo Lake Loop, which is right at the top of one of the mid trips of Bryce Canyon. And I remember going to this area where it was just stunningly beautiful. I would pause on the side of the trail and just look out and see it and realize where I was going to wind up and go. I wound up on this odd trail. There was one place that this guy from the group behind us, it was about 20 people in my group, about 15 in the group after us. They were a few miles behind, maybe 30 minutes behind. But one guy was just an elite athlete. He was just passing us and saying, hey guys, passing us and coming back and passing us, coming back. He just did every trip twice. I think he must have doubled the whole experience. But I was kind of this off, mostly smooth dirt trail and dense pine forest. And I remember emerging into this area where I could see the meadow coming out, this postcard scenery. And I remember hearing someone shout, be careful. And when I emerged from this area, there was, of course, a big root in the middle of the trail that I hit and kind of bumped off of and skidded to a stop because I was going far slower than the guy before me. The guy before me was this elite athlete who had hit the root, plummeted, jumped into the air, was launched several. I didn't see this. He just told me the story, but he wound up scraping his leg and arm on this big kind of crag of rock that had come out. And it looked like a guillotine blade sticking out next to the trail. And he just kept saying, careful, as I approached. I got closer, and I wound up kind of hitting. I laid down my bike. I skidded against the ground, and I had this big giant area of road rash on my arm. But then I see him, and he's lying there on the ground, kind of half on his bike. There is blood all over his hands, and he's holding his calf tightly with one hand and trying to wave his part of his shirt that ripped off in the air so people would see it. And he was thinking of others, which I was very impressed with. But he repeated this a couple times. Finally, I see this. I skidded to a stop, having been slowed down, but I went over the bars. He had hit everything on the way down and landed and cut himself. And I saw him on this broken, like, big branch that had been down, and he was clearly bleeding. And the shard of stone had carved this deep, ugly laceration in his calf. And it was kind of high up. It was inside his calf, so it was a spot that the saphenous vein sits, a spot that he could have an arterial bleeder from. And when I first saw it, I saw blood flowing, but not squirting. And then he looked at his own wound, and I saw him release a little bit, and you could see a lot more blood coming out. My first instinct was to apologize to this guy. And I said, oh, I'm so sorry. And he said, I think I'm bleeding at a good clip. Your shirt's ripped? And he noticed that I had a big rip up my arm. And I looked, I just had a little bit of road rash. But my first aid kit had moleskin for blisters. It had a gauze wrap, and that's kind of it. He had an ace wrap and a pair of socks because he had injured his ankle a couple days before. And we wound up kind of makeshifting this pressure dressing where we put the socks in a pad, put the gauze in the wound, the socks wound up on top of it, rolled up tight, and then this dressing that we wrapped around his calf just to compress. And I'd trained as an EMT 5 years before, but I didn't keep it up. I didn't have anything with me. He, when he loosened his grip and I saw more bleeding, we both kind of looked at each other as a little shocked. And I checked his pulse, and his pulse was fast, and I couldn't tell if it was weak or not. I was a young guy, and he was just an athlete with heart beating crazy. So the bleeding soaked through this dressing a bit and then stopped in about a palm size area on this now pressure dressing that had an ACE wrap wrapped around it. And it dawned on me that none of my group had passed through behind me because I was in the wrong place. And he was about 2 or 3 miles ahead of his group. So we kind of chatted for a minute. And I said, now, anywhere else bleeding? We looked at his back. We looked at his front. We looked at kind of everything to make sure things were okay. And I think the bleeding was controlled at that point. But we were worried about who was coming by. And he just said, listen, he knew the trail. Go up to the top of the trail, check this direction, and, see if anyone's coming and call them over. I said, absolutely. And I went up and I came back down. I went up like 6 times. And, fat David Shapiro was climbing up the hill and going back down, climbing up the hill, sweating my butt off, but realizing that he was awake, alert, and okay, but we had no help. It took about 15 minutes. One of his group came by, and I remember me feeling so relieved that somebody else was there, and it wasn't my responsibility anymore. And I know that I was going
your responsibility to evacuate him,
to help him at all. Never mind evacuate him. I wanted to be able to help. I didn't know how to evacuate somebody, but I also didn't know how to call for help because I didn't have a satellite phone, or there was no beacons, there was nothing.
Because you're in the middle of the wilderness at this point. Yeah. You're in the middle of nowhere. And was he able to walk, or I assume he couldn't even walk?
So once we got the dressing tight enough and secure, he was able to walk, but he was limping, and he could walk much slower than normal. He couldn't cycle, and I was going to let him be on this cycle. So we wound up getting so I went up to the top of the hill. One of his group was coming by. I recognized their shirts because they had a team color on, and I flagged them down. I said, hey, one of your guys is here. And I shouted, and he told me his name, and I shouted it back to them. They came up and came around. Their leader was only about half a mile behind this guy. He scurried back up the hill and slowed everyone down. The entire group of 13 or 14 others showed up. They radioed for help. They had all they needed, and they radioed their follow truck who was on the road, who got an ATV to come out and help him get back. I will tell you, I never heard a single thing about him again. I don't know any details. I only knew his first name at the time, and it's probably Matthew or Michael or something, but never heard another word about it. But I remember showing up to my end of my thing, my little meadow that I was supposed to be at 2 hills over, and having blood on my shirt, and everyone's going, oh my God, are you okay? And I'm like, I'm fine. It wasn't me. And they thought I left a body in the woods somewhere. But I think the big thing that happened to me that day was the concept of what if. I was convinced I was going into transplant then, so trauma wasn't my biggest thing. But what if I didn't come along? What if somebody else was too far behind and he just kept bleeding? What if others in his group, or he was alone? I mean, nobody goes out there alone to this area, but what if that happened? So I'm writing this down, thinking to myself now, rewriting it into computer so I have it memorialized, and I'm like, I should submit this somewhere. Let me put it to Outside Magazine or something. Let them carry the story and do something. So I'm fascinated with the idea of this experience. And looking back, I wonder why Eastern Mountain Sports and REI and all these different shops that are out there, do they sell this stuff? So I go in the REI. REI has Stop the Bleed kits, but they're, the chitosan powders. They come with a little bit of gauze. They don't have tourniquets. They have one kit that has one, but it's like a $600. It's not good. So the $38 to $45 kit is what people should carry. They should carry this with them everywhere, because you never know when you're going to have to use it on yourself or use it on someone else. And we can't predict this sort of thing happening. But really, the tagline I always give is, bleeding is the one that causes death. Bleeding is the number one cause of preventable death worldwide. And that is the cause, not the means, or the so-called disease burden of bleeding affects multiple types of injury. So if you die from asphyxiation, you die from brain flow problems. But if you cut yourself, you have bleeding internally from trauma, Is it a fall? Is it a car crash? Is it a bicycle collision? All those things result in bleeding. And if we can help control that bleeding worldwide, that's what the Stop the Bleed program is for.
So I want to just clarify for the audience, because at a high meta level, there are two forms of trauma that can cause bleeding. Correct me if I'm wrong. One is penetrating trauma, and the other is blunt trauma. Correct? Is that too simplistic?
I don't think it's too simplistic at all. It's what most trauma centers look at. But most patients who have one type will have bleeding. The other type will have bleeding. Sometimes you have both. The question is, for me, is it torso, abdomen, and head, or is it extremity? Because you can have a fracture from blunt trauma that's bleeding inside your upper arm or your thigh or your calf that bleeds a ton inside those spaces and fills them up with 1.5 liters of blood, and that's a third of your blood volume, versus a penetrating injury that causes bleeding inside and outside that you drain onto the ground that you can see. We don't always see the bleeding inside. I think I told you the story that a dear friend of mine from my college days was climbing in the Himalayas recently, and she's summited Everest. She's done all the big tours. She's a tour leader. She and her partner had this big business doing this sort of thing, and were expert. And they had I believe a fixed rope gave way. They had a small avalanche. She tumbled down the hill and wound up having internal injuries and dying just a few weeks ago.
Oh,
But
I'm so sorry.
these sorts of things occur more than we think they do worldwide. So when it comes to the internal bleeding, that blunt trauma, it kills just as much, if not more, than penetrating trauma does. Certainly happens a lot more.
So now that I am 61 and proud to call myself 61, and it feels like, tell me if I'm wrong about this, but from when I first started practicing medicine in the early 90s, late 80s and early 90s, it felt to me like the first uh, teaching of what we do in the emergency department is to give saline or salt water or lactated ringers. And it feels like there has been a shift really over the last 5 to 10 years. Correct me if I'm wrong about this, that we are really been much more aggressive working with our trauma teams about giving blood earlier. Is that fair?
I think it's fair, but I think it goes back further than that.
Mm-hmm.
I remember people talking about, there used to be this big thing between non-surgery and surgery of lactated ringers versus saline, and the big discussion about acidemia from both, because if you have the lactated ringer solution, the pH was 5.5 to 6, and if you have saline
Mm-hmm.
solution, it's 4.5 to 5. Both of them make you acidemic, and both of them dilute both your blood counts, your red blood cell counts. So it dilutes your hemoglobin and your hematocrit, but they also dilute your clotting factors. So the earlier we give those things back, we recognize that it's a life-saving thing to avoid certain things. And I'm going to give you the list because you know this. It's that triad of death: to avoid hypothermia, to avoid acidosis, and to avoid coagulopathy. And I'll add the avoid hypocalcemia as the center. But if you think about those three things: hypothermia, low temperature; acidosis, the buildup of lactic acid in your blood; and coagulopathy, or lack of bleeding factors, when you give somebody saline, lactated ringers, or any crystalloid, any saltwater solutions, they do all three of those things. And then the low blood flow, because of low blood pressure, causes hypothermia. That results in more acidosis. That results in more coagulopathy or problems with clotting blood. And then it goes around in many circles. And it's that the lethal triad, or the cycle of death, whatever you want to call it. So we have changed. And I think we've moved towards not just avoiding the fluids, but we've moved towards early and assertive blood replacement with whole blood, and that's in the field, and then early and aggressive treatments to prevent and treat and restore coagulopathies. Because you can give whole blood in the field, 1 or 2 units, I should say. Then you arrive at the hospital in most places in the country less than 15 minutes later. And by the time that blood is in, things are better. But if you're in the middle of, go ahead, please.
No, so I want to get back to the saline and the lactated ringers argument. So in the field and in the hospitals, giving giving crystalloid fluids, saline or lactated ringers, could actually cause harm under
Yes,
certain circumstances?
yes, and I think that the harm comes when you have a large amount of bleeding. If you cut yourself and you stop it early, like the
Sure.
guy we talked about, he bled, then he stopped. You
Hmm.
think they gave him a ton of blood transfusion at the hospital? I would bet that they didn't because his blood was saved. He may
Hmm.
have bled some, but he probably had a normal blood pressure. His hematocrit may have dropped a little bit, especially when they gave him fluid,
Hmm.
but he wasn't dying from this problem. I think when it comes to modern hemorrhage management, these fluids can be physiologically harmful when used in excess and when used as the only normal thing going on. We talk about saline and other fluids to help raise blood pressure, but in trauma these days and in many patients, we try not to restore their blood pressure to absolutely normal because we don't want to dislodge clots. We don't want to have that raised blood pressure too much. We want to have it maintained. We tolerate a little bit of lower blood pressure. And I think increases bleeding in uncontrolled hemorrhage leads down that path. If it's uncontrolled and you don't intervene early, you're going to be in trouble before you get better.
So, from your knowledge as a trauma surgeon and working both in the field and in hospital settings, and now as chair of the Stop the Bleed program, are there unnecessary deaths, in your opinion, in the United States from bleeding? Are there people dying out there that shouldn't be dying because they have unawareness, or they're in places where there's unawareness around how to stop the bleed?
Yes, it's a
Really,
short, easy yes.
In the United States of America?
Yes.
Wow. Can you
I
give
will,
some
I will give you the
examples?
examples.
Yeah.
If someone is in the field, we've seen this, and I will wax political for a moment, but if you had, and the politics aside, if someone is injured at the scene and people don't help them immediately, we don't know where they're bleeding, we don't know if they're bleeding, and we don't know what we can do to stop it. So if you think about someone who has even a small amount of bleeding at the scene, if you bleed a little bit and it's uncontrolled and it doesn't stop on its own, you're going to bleed more. I think I mentioned to you the rules of Shapiro. The longer you don't do something, the more you have to do. The longer you bleed, the longer you bleed. The more tests you run, the more tests you run. The longer you stay in the hospital, the longer you stay in the hospital. But um, there's uncontrolled bleeding deaths all over the world. And yes, even in the most, not that we're the most civilized country sometimes, but um, it, in the world of bleeding control, if we don't intervene early, we have eventual deaths that come from it. Will the person die in the field in front of us? Maybe not. But if they're, a liter and a half of blood volume down when they arrive at the hospital, we know that that causes a whole body wide inflammatory process that makes them wind up in the intensive care unit. Then we're giving them massive transfusions in the hospital. Then we're giving them tons of support because we give them massive fluid. They have lung problems. They can't breathe on their own. So they wind up in the ICU on a ventilator. Then they wind up with an infection because somebody put a special IV in their neck under less than sterile conditions because they were doing it as an emergency. Uh, I think all those things contribute to the downfall of people who bleed when all you had to do, all any of us could have done was intervene early. Now we can't stop all bleeding in the field, but you can stop a lot of it.
And aren't there programs now, EMS programs around the country, that are becoming more aggressive about giving blood in the field? In other words, that they're carrying blood with them in the ambulance or at their companies and are able to bring blood to the patient in the field. We had a situation here in Little Rock recently with a windstorm. It may have been a tornado where a tree fell on a patient, and they exsanguinated in front of everyone before they can get her out. And if the paramedics had been able to bring her blood, it may have saved her life. Is that happening? Is that becoming more and more the standard of care, or is it really early in its evolution of having paramedics bring blood to patients in the field?
I think that there's two components there. If you look at the whole blood programs across the U.S., every time I look at the news, once a week there's a new program out there, and some of them carry whole blood, some carry thawed plasma, some just carry tranexamic acid, some
Mhm.
carry Celox or combat gauze, and I think there's
And when you
around
said transexamic acid, you're talking about TXA.
TXA, correct?
Hmm. Hmm.
Because if you can give that early, you can decrease the likelihood of having a problem. It doesn't fix everything, but it fixes some things. If you
Hmm.
look, there's actually there's a, I'm not part of this organization, but there's a pre-hospital blood transfusion coalition. I think it's prehospitaltransfusion.org that has an interactive map that shows you programs across the country. And there are, I think, a little more than 300 programs of EMS across the U.S. that use pre-hospital blood in some way. It may just be that some use TXA as an IV medication. Some even use DDAVP. Or so those out there who don't know what that is, that's desmopressin. It's a hormone that we can give that increases the efficacy of some platelets. Um, Topical hemostats, these powders or things that you can put into a wound, and then of course liquid plasma. There's a couple dried plasma products out there that I don't think are widely available yet. I think the Army's using them. Whole blood is, dare I say, widely available, but it is a precious resource because we have to get it from people who donate it. And then there are companies that make concentrated products like fibrinogen, made by a couple different companies. And fibrinogen is the precursor to fibrin, which causes clots to, well, starts the process of clots forming. So if you have all these in your arsenal, so to speak, and that's what hemorrhage management really is. For those out there in your listenership who are in the medical world or healthcare world, they know what massive transfusion protocols are. MTP starts at the hospital door, unfortunately. Yes, there are programs that do pre-hospital blood, but it should be massive hemorrhage management programs that start at the scene with a tourniquet or direct pressure and packing. It should start at the scene with finding out a little bit of information about the patient while you call EMS. EMS or first responders arrive. They can also use these items and gauze to compress and put Israeli type bandages on or other things. But then they need to be able to give the TXA, the desmopressin, the agents that they have available to them. Let the hospital know I'm coming in with someone who's lost 1.5 liters of blood, so the hospital can have uncross-matched blood ready in the trauma room. And then you can give things early and fast, because if you give them early and fast, you don't have to give as much in the end.
So it seems like we should have a stop the bleed kit in every single car in the U.S. and every glove compartment should have one. It's like, seriously, it seems like it's obvious, like that would be a potential lifesaver, even if it could save hundreds of lives from the millions that we have here, hundreds of millions in the U.S. It could actually save lives in terms of bystanders having that kind of equipment available.
Agreed. I think that there's a few things that are contributing to that program. Is one, I was at, so just so you know, the Department of Transportation and the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration are very pro treatment early.
Hmm.
And people say, well, they're not a healthcare organization. They are. They help with EMS. They help run 911 systems, and they do this as part of the world of the DOT. When that happens, though, they have to have the infrastructure to help. So if you think about what's available, we have gauze and tourniquets and things that we can put in cars. I agree with you. They should be in every automotive manufacturer's wheelhouse. That kit that you buy online, if you get the right kit, can cost you $43. It's not terribly expensive. When you're buying a 15 to 40 grand car, it's easy to get. When it's installed there and you can grab it off the car seat or from some compartment inside and have it ready, you can treat yourself, you can treat others. That's wonderful. Legislation is in, I think we're in 18 states across the US that Stop the Bleed has a legislative action saying that either those kits are mounted in walls of public buildings, or everyone has to learn it by the time they go through high school, or there's another method that people are using for either education, empowerment, and technique, or access to the materials. In Connecticut, for instance, the access to materials is the most important. So public buildings have to have these as of this July 1st, and it's part of the building code. So new buildings have to put them in. Um, the car manufacturers outside the U.S. may not have to abide by certain things, but they're doing this in certain places. I've actually contacted several companies, and I have a couple conversations going on about that very topic. I would love to see that happen both with motorcycles and with cars. But I'd also love to see it at intersections. And there's a company called, and I'm not involved with them directly, but they are a partner to the American College of Surgeons. They're called Life Saving Technologies, or lifesaving.tech. They do kiosk-based kind of emergency aid stations. So if you think about this, I'm going to give you my spiel about my outside. Outside my house, I have one of those little mini libraries. And inside it are mostly children's books because there's lots of kids in my neighborhood and the parents put them in when they're done. I also have some banned books because I like to put out there. Underneath it, I have a bag with a stop the bleed kit hanging in a watertight bag. So if someone in the neighborhood needs it, they can use it. I also have Narcan because even though I live in the suburbs, I want to make sure people who live near me have access to materials they need for harm reduction. So I think this should be literally everywhere. Life Support Technologies does this in a way where they will set up a kiosk with I think your college's banner on it. So, the blue lights that we had on our campuses when we were in college, that you hit an emergency. Great that you can activate emergency, but then you got to stand there and wait while you're bleeding or having an injury. These stations have things like the Stop the Bleed kit. They have an automatic external defibrillator. They have epinephrine. They have, or if you're allowed to, they have Narcan. They have albuterol, and they have other things that you can use if you're trained. And when you open it up, it automatically alarms to the 911 company. This sort of wired connection is important. And whether it's going to be that in the rural, for instance, if that mountain biker that was near me had a little app or device in their phone or his phone that could be activated, and you hit the button and you say bleeding, then the drone comes and drops a line next to you and you grab it off the drone and there's your materials. That technology exists and is being used in sub-Saharan Africa, being used in some places in the Southeast Asia, and actually some places in the US. Can it deliver an AED? Can it deliver bleeding control kits? Can it deliver blood products? Can it deliver an ECMO machine so that someone who's trained nearby to put a catheter in can start the process? All those things are what the future will bring.
So let me ask you a slightly controversial question. So you're a physician, you're well trained. We live in a society that is litigious on lots of different levels. And when you were assisting that biker, you were acting as a good Samaritan. And I've assisted patients on planes before when there's been an event. I'm the first one there. If it's an adult, it's a little scary for me, but I just fuddle through it, being a pediatric ER physician. But because adults are not big kids, David. But is there any, Stop the Bleed is obviously a public advocacy program and a public health program that you are trying to literally save lives by teaching the public how to reduce, the incidence of a serious bleeding event that could lead to shock and death. Are there any concerns about physicians or the lay public helping other people from a litigious standpoint, or do you feel like Good Samaritan laws cover that?
So I've looked into this. It's something that exists. Good Samaritan laws actually now are active in every state in the union, every territory in the U.S. And the important part about that is that there was one state, I will not mention which one, that had a very specific Good Samaritan law that included AEDs, but excluded anything else. That is now modified to include bleeding control efforts. So every state has enacted a statute that protects people who voluntarily help during an emergency from any civil liability for ordinary negligence. That means if they do something wrong, etc., they're still protected because their intention is to help. That includes for CPR, it includes for Stop the Bleed and other things. A few Good Samaritan laws, depending on the intervention used, will only protect licensed or certified people, but that's few and far between. Not many states mention bleeding or tourniquets or wound packing, but they all recognize that it exists. There's a wide variation on whether bleeding control is named in a statute, and that's okay because the specific needs will eventually come up. But the bottom line is that every state has Good Samaritan laws. Outside the U.S., the same thing is true. There are Good Samaritan laws in many countries, and many countries actually have a requirement to help when you see something that's
Mm-hmm.
going on. So instead of a Good Samaritan law, it's an implicit protection because you have a duty to assist.
Mm.
In the EU, this exists. So Germany has a duty to assist. Ireland has a civil liability if you don't act. The UK doesn't have a strong one, but the strong case law protects the reasonable bystander aid. There's Belgium, Netherlands, Switzerland. I was actually in Norway, where uh, I was literally in a kayak in a fjord, and I saw somebody climbing, and I was waving to them because they were just climbing, and my companion, we were rowing, paddling together, and I was at peace. It was wonderful. And then I heard a scream and a thump, and this person had fallen off the rock, cut
Oh my
open
gosh.
their jacket and cut themselves. And we're paddling over, trying to be helpful, thinking about it. And the person that this person was with was standing over him, holding pressure. But another climber, about 50 feet away, ran over on the little ground next to the water and said, "I know, stop the bleed. I know, stop the bleed," and came over, brought his kit, and started helping. And it was just great to see that it was there.
Mm.
But you can and you should help when you see this. Part of the program in Stop the Bleed is empowering people to not be fearful of intervening when someone sees something. Because what I don't want to see people do is just reporting. Um, we should be able to help anyone. That said, we have to be careful. We have to be careful about exposure. You're dealing with blood. And although the likelihood of you being exposed to disease is very low, it's present. And the best thing to do I tell folks, I have it right here. I'll show you. Yeah, I do. My little pair of gloves that I keep in a little wrap, just brown non-latex nitrile gloves. Those cost me 30 cents because I went to the store and bought them. But you have those with you. You can protect yourself. Wash your hands afterwards. It's
Mm.
pretty easy to keep clean and keep not worried about this sort of thing. So it matters, and it's important that way.
So we've talked about this before in another episode, but the number one cause of death in the pediatric population for children 0 to 18 is firearm violence. Is the is there a way that the Stop the Bleed program addresses penetrating trauma? We had talked about blunt trauma with that patient that fell and has an obvious extremity injury where you can place either a tourniquet or obviously direct pressure to address the life-threatening injury and apply pressure, et cetera. What about penetrating injuries like bullets?
So, as you know, and many people know, bullets have a lot more energy in them than other things that cut us or that injure us. But if
But there
you,
can be bleeding at the entrance and exit site,
yes,
correct?
there can. And I will tell you that Stop the Bleed was born of a few different events. The initiating event was the events at Sandy Hook. Subsequent events like the bombing in the Boston Marathon and other things that have contributed to this over the years have taught us that it's not just about guns and it's not just about stabbings. It's about using a saw in school or a knife in the kitchen, or I was talking to somebody today about a garbage can cutting you because the edge was sharp because of an animal chewing on. Lots of things can cut you. When it comes to violence and when it comes to especially firearms, the same tenets are true. If you bleed to death, you're gone. If you can do things that help decrease the likelihood of you breathing to death, it's going to be part of the issue. Now, for those out there who are going, well, this doesn't prevent anything. Agreed. It's secondary prevention. It prevents things after the event has happened. It does not address the root cause of violence. It does not address the nature of wounds that happen in the chest where you can't put a tourniquet on. You can hold pressure on, but you can't really put a tourniquet on things and deal with it. But I think the awareness of this and the concept of Stop the Bleed being the only public facing program from the American College of Surgeons, and by the way, it's from the American College of Surgeons, the American College of Emergency Physicians, the Committee on Combat Casualty, Tactical Combat Casualty Care, and the National Association of EMTs all got together and made this process with the Department of Defense. So this is a comprehensive program. They can only do what they can do. But having a program that makes the public aware that bleeding is a risk makes us also think about how we handle our neighbors and how we deal with people around us. And if we're willing to listen to this kind of program and say, I can help my neighbor, maybe that will be a more Mr. Rogers in the world than and less people saying, "I want to hurt my neighbor."
Hmm.
Will it? I don't know. I doubtful. But I think in combination with having bleeding control kits next to AEDs and teaching teachers and bystanders and students and integrating stop the bleed into emergency operations plans and student training with CPR and AEDs, it makes sense to have it, but it's the skill we never want to have to use.
So let's talk about Sandy Hook for just a minute. I want to know, both as a human being and as a peds ER physician, what this program you said was born out of Sandy Hook, and I want to know from you what the learnings were from that horrific day. And for those of you who don't know, everyone should know this was the day that there were a multitude of children who were massacred at an elementary school in Connecticut, not far-ish from where David lives and practices, and was a real stain on our society in some ways. And we live in a world, in terms of the work that we do as emergency medicine and critical care trauma physicians, where we experience trauma. And there are always opportunities to learn and learn from things. So what did we learn from this horrific event?
Well, so out of respect for the people that were injured, there were, I believe, 26 children and 2 adults injured or killed in this event. And if you think about the way that mass shootings work in the U.S. alone, there were more than 420 mass shootings in 2025. There have been 170 in Connecticut, in the United States, since the beginning of 2026. So mass shootings are horrifying. I don't want to trigger people when we talk about this, but if we think about the nature of this phenomenon, and I will not criticize any group for what has been done, because the groups in Texas have gone through this, and we look at the events themselves and do the after actions and say, what could we have done differently to protect these kids and or protect anyone from these events? We can go look and say, in a building that had people in it, that a shooter went in, should we have had a barrier to entry? Should we have had an earlier alarm? Should we have had something that said this person is not welcome in that building? Should we have had something that intervened in that person who's the shooter, and I mean anywhere, earlier, recognizing signs of behavior, signs of concern, or signs that someone is about to do something bad? Then when the event occurs, can we intervene faster? Stop the bleed is one of those things that can help in this setting, but doesn't prevent the gunshots. The question is, if you look at people who are injured by shooting, many of them are injured from bleeding. They get injured and they die from the bleeding that happens. And there's this is a little bit of a stretch on it, but there's a concept of scoop and run, and there's a concept of scoop and go, or stay and play. The stay and play is, can we treat the patient at the scene and fix them temporarily and get them to the hospital, or do you just scoop them up and try to treat them in the ambulance and go into the hospital? The 2 caveats to that are, if the scene itself is still in danger for those who would be rescuing, the first tenet of any care is, do not become an additional victim or injured person, because then you won't be able to help at all. So the nature of this phenomenon is, if somebody across the street from me starts shooting someone and I can go there and help them before that person shoots me, great. But if I get shot, I'm just another victim. I'm not a rescuer. And we have to remember the rescuers matter in this setting. We can't put people at risk. It's very hard to look back and say this phenomenon could have been prevented. And I don't mean Sandy Hook, I mean any mass shooting event, or even a single shooting event. This phenomenon, we wouldn't have had to have seen as many deaths if we'd intervened sooner, because you can't do that to yourself. The high-powered rifles that were used in these settings are so devastating to an adult human. Imagine how devastating they are to a smaller framed child or a kindergartner. It's horrible.
That's inhumane to think about. It feels so. Why are we seeing such a mass epidemic in mass shootings? What is different now than 40 or 50 years ago? Because there were guns available in the U.S. 40, 50 years ago. We've had guns available in the U.S. since the time of the birth of our country, 250 years ago. So what is happening now that is increasing the um, the tragedies of mass shootings, the increasing epidemic of it?
In the absence of being a little too politically charged, there are facts of the world, and the facts of the world are that when we built our Constitution on the Second Amendment, which I believe in, I believe people should be able to bear arms if they want to, but they have to do it safely. Things haven't been recorded as well in the last, they've been recorded better now than they ever have been. In the 1800s, most weapons were single shot, slow to reload, low capacity. Modern firearms are high velocity, high energy, large magazines, rapid fire, greater tissue destruction, and bullet technology has improved. One person can injure many other people quickly. We also have even though COVID changed this a little bit, we are back to having big crowds getting together, and we're having events like carnivals and festivals, and urban density is much higher. So the likelihood of people with, say, 1,000 people on a lawn outside a college, or hundreds of people in a mall, or tens of thousands in a stadium is much higher. So if you have people in one place, you can have certainly more of that. There's also concepts of community ties. If someone is isolated in their mental health stress and they're not being intervened upon or even recognized as having a problem, they can be, and I'll use a bad word, they can be groomed or radicalized online. They can have grievance amplification. It's something that the people in prevention use as a term. It's identity-based grievance amplification that identifies them, invites them to a group to talk, and then they find ways to escalate these folks who are affected by others and really make them want to do worse and want to do harm. We as a human culture aren't innately violent, but we have made ourselves able to be lethal in so many ways that when mental health systems fail, or when social safety nets fail, or when firearm securities fail, those three things can meet and violate the cultural norm of us being able to just go out with a gun and shoot somebody.
Interesting.
I,
In the pediatric population, I'm familiar with the literature of mental health emergencies in children, and since COVID 2020, the number of children coming in with behavioral health emergencies is triple and it hasn't gone down since COVID. And I wonder if it's similar to adults, because you had talked about the multitude of factors, and it's clear that it's very clear to me that mental health is a big part of it, and social media, as you've alluded to, and being radicalized by social media and access to information is those are all part of the equation. So in the adult world, is there a higher incidence of mental health since COVID? Do you think that's a contributing part of this?
Realizing this is not my area of expertise, there certainly is a higher diagnosis of
Mm-hmm.
mental health concerns and
Mm-hmm.
people having
Mm-hmm.
less attention to it because there's such a burden. There's also there's fewer resources around. And I think the programs that have been shut down, and I mean things like suicide hotlines being shut down, and the public health epidemic of depression and anxiety and substance abuse and use, and even suicidality. These are all things that have reinforced the aloneness that some people feel and the inability to get away from their own thoughts. But there's also a reduced face-to-face interaction. We have online courses. We have I'm doing a master's degree now that is completely online. I've never met any of my classmates or professors. I think there's also the always on cognitive load that we face now with social media. Every time you swipe on the screen for TikTok or Instagram or all these different resources, you face something new that someone's telling you that you don't know if it's true or not. And you have to deal with that individually. There's no BS meter or fact checker on every social media platform that tells you whether something is believable.
Mm.
And you have to judge on your own, which is scary.
Well, I want to get back to the story and the Stop the Bleed program. So, if I am interested in getting more information about this or actually purchasing a Stop the Bleed kit, how would I go about that?
Well, a couple things there. So, number one, if someone's interested in learning Stop the Bleed, there are a few ways to do it. First of all, the resource that people need. Oh, let me just say one thing. The American College of Surgeons program called Stop the Bleed is not intended to be done for any money. This is supposed to be free. Anyone who wants to get trained can get trained. To do this for free, you can go online to stopthebleed.org. Right now, there's a little special area called stopthebleed.org/summer because we talk about summer-related injuries. And there's an interactive online-only course that you can go through and get a downloaded certificate. If you're then looking for a hands-on version so you can learn to use the tourniquet that I showed before, or you learn to use packing gauze and do what you need to do for the course, you can request it online, or you can look and see if there are courses near you. I tell people to look for the stopthebleed.org moniker because there are other organizations that teach that charge for it. I don't want people to get caught in being charged something they shouldn't have, and I don't want them to think that I'm telling them to go to a for-fee course. I want them to do it for free. But the stopthebleed.org site has a place to request courses and to find courses. And if you have a group, for instance, your scout troop, Rotary Club, birdhouse building group, hiking crew, metal detecting group, lifeguard class, or your, I don't know, soccer team want to know how to stop the bleed, we encourage this. And we're willing to make groups on college campuses. We're willing to work with organizations. We work with a group called Lewis Tree. We work with Amazon and a few other programs to help them do these classes on site. I taught the other day at a private school in Connecticut that requested it called Hotchkiss. The Hotchkiss school invited me out. Their pre-health high school students wanted to do this. They had 17 of them. They never asked better questions. They were amazing. And we engaged with them on doing this. So they wanted to do the full course in person. We have the online only course, and we have the online only course plus a hands-on supplement. All those things are available at stopthebleed.org. Secondarily, if you are a healthcare provider, really of any kind, and I mean doctor, nurse, PA, APRN, CRNA, midwife, chiropractors, ophthalmologists, optometrists, we have even sworn law officers in fire and EMS. Anyone in those fields can become an instructor. And the same website, right below where it says instructor portal, there's a place to log in and actually try to become an instructor right there. As long as you have the license and the experience to do it, you can do that online. So we expand our instructorship to over 200,000. Now we have over 200,000 people worldwide, and we have more than almost 5.8 million people trained in the world in Stop the Bleed. We want that to be 10 times or 20 times that number. So if anybody wants it, we can do it.
That's tremendous. As always, it's been a very interesting and fascinating discussion with a lot of sage wisdom. And most importantly, I really appreciate your friendship and your wishes of a happy birthday. And I couldn't imagine spending an hour with a friend more than hanging out with you and learning and really appreciate your leadership as well. I think this program is phenomenal, and I hope that folks that are listening will get involved and at least become trained in this life-saving kit. I know I'm going to go online and get one and put one in the glove compartment of my car. And yeah, great program, great talk, and thanks for being on the show for the fifth time, Dr. Shapiro.
I feel like a five timers club. Can I mention one other thing to add?
Yeah,
Is
please.
that you can buy the materials on the same website. There's a little shop portion, and you will find that is the area with the lowest cost and the highest quality product. We don't want tourniquets that are going to fall apart, so just keep that in mind. And if people ask out there, do I need to get the quick clot or the fancy gauze? You don't need to, because it does add expense. It'll also add an expiration date. But I keep literally a ripped T-shirt in the bag with the tourniquet and the little card for the instructions. So thank you, David. And again, happy birthday.
Thank you. For those listening, please subscribe on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you get your podcast information. We're at 75,000 subscribers now. It's just incredible. And on YouTube, and we're growing on Facebook and Instagram as well. It's been a fun journey, and really this is part of the fun, is getting to hang out with people who are doing really amazing things in healthcare and just continuing to unveil the human side of medicine. And this is Dr. David Spiro signing off. I hope you all have a great rest of the day.
Thanks for listening to HUMED with David Spiro, MD. If you like this episode, make sure you're subscribed on Spotify, Apple, or your favorite podcast platform. The video versions are also available on YouTube. Make sure you subscribe and hit the bell there so that you never miss a future episode.